Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jo Flick with the Montana State Library, and welcome to this little four-part course. It's going to make you into a practically professional researcher. I would like to ask you to have a piece of paper and a pencil or pen nearby, and if you can grab your smartphone or a tablet and have that available as well, we're going to use both of those tools in the class today. So I have a plan for today's class. This is a four-part course, and we're going to kind of take things step by step. Today we're going to explore different types of surveys and some types of questions. We're just going to start to think about questions that you can answer with a survey tool. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about alternative methods to surveys. Now, this is intended to be a very interactive course. And though I know we're online and we can't see each other and we can't kind of divide up into small groups to work on things, so we're going to try to make do with a couple of other activities that we're going to do in this course. And you will have a little homework assignment at the end, so be prepared for that. And if you happen to be watching the recording, you're still welcome to participate in the homework. The file where we're going to be posting our materials and sharing things will still be available for you too. So you can survey in many different ways. We're going to talk about several of those ways today, but we are going to be focused quite a bit on questionnaires, which are one specific style of survey. And polls are a even more kind of subset of questionnaires. A poll is a simple qualitative questionnaire. So questionnaires can have a couple different types of questions in them. Preferably they do have different types of questions in them. But a poll is very qualitative data, very numerical data, so you can say this percentage of people responded in this way. So we hear about political polls all the time. We're actually going to start today with some polls. And I'm going to launch one right now. Should be pretty simple for you to answer. So I expect everybody to answer, and my Go to Training interface tells me when everybody's answered. So right now it tells me 64% of you have answered, 71%. So everybody's figuring this out. Just click and submit. 93%. I suppose it is possible that somebody's walked away. Oh, 100%, perfect. What a good class. Okay, now I'm going to share with you the results. So we can see our group here today, 71% consider themselves a public library, 14% a library district, 7% a school or college, and 7% of you are in the other category. So that's terrific. Let's do another one. Move that out. So what about your position at the library? Let's see, are you a library director? The first answer was a library director. And 50% of you have voted. Again, we're hoping for 100% participation today. And still waiting. There you go. Thanks. So we have half of you are library directors, and then some people don't fit into any of these categories, which is fine. 14% manage a department or a team, and 14% are frontline staff or a library technician. We don't have any library programming staff today, so great. Good to know. All right. I got a couple more. These are a little different. As you're completing this poll, I want you to notice how how this poll is structured and what you think about my intentions might have been when I created it for you. So this is a poll about how confident you are. And the responses are coming in. We're about 80%. Might have to think about this a little bit. Okay, so I don't know how predictive you are about where this poll might find, but thinking about why I might have done it, it's very helpful for me, and here are the results, to kind of get a clue of where you all stand in terms of your expertise coming in here. I mean, we've got 14%, or at least a couple of you are very confident that your surveys tend to get the results that you want. So I'm letting you all know, and those of you who are up in that 50% range, 57% range, that mostly your surveys yield useful information, I'm really glad to see that, because I can count on you to contribute to the class and give your peers feedback and support, and that we'll probably learn more from each other than you will learn directly from me. So use that chat box to get in there and have ideas. Unmute your microphone and speak up if you have something to suggest or add to the conversation. And those of you who have little or no experience yet, you're in exactly the right place. This is very much an introductory class, but we will cover things and improve everybody's skill set over the course of these 4 weeks that we're focused on this topic. So I have one more. It's similar, and again, be thinking about why I would have created this particular poll. Okay, we'll finish that. This is a little easier question to answer maybe than the last. A few of you have never created a survey, but very few. For the most part, most of you guys have some experience. So you may already have some idea about what you want to learn in this class, and I hope you'll share that with me as we go along too. Today's class is kind of set up, and I've kind of planned the hour, but next week's class and the 2 weeks after that, I am completely open to making changes in my syllabus to meet your needs. In fact, the homework that I'm going to give you at the end of today, I will actually use some of your responses in planning next week's class. So I'm just going to check the chat box. Some people have already pointed out that they, should have picked library district. Okay, Abby, you're forgiven for that. And Patricia Smith said, she suggested that I want to see how to focus the class information, and that's exactly right. I also want you to think that my other purpose in creating those last 2 questions was for every person individually to kind of think about what they already know, because that's an important step in learning, is to kind of reflect on your current, what you know now, and that kind of gets you ready to learn the next thing. So those are polls. I mean, you probably use polls in your everyday work all the time with your patrons. So the first and second tell us a little about the composition of class, and the 3 and 4 are self-evaluation tools. And we talked a little bit. Anyone else have any idea what have you used self-evaluation tools? You can unmute yourself, or have you ever taken a class where that's part of the design of the class? Two very different types of polls that I shared with you today. You can use the chat box, or your microphone. And Marianne said in the chat, self-evaluation polls can be used as pre and post tests. Exactly. It's one way to show how the class, then you've kind of moved the needle with people. If they feel more confident about something at the end of a class, it would be useful for me to offer up this poll later on in our course to see if your confidence is building, if I'm heading in the right direction. Great. So these are my 3 reasons for using those self-evaluation tools. I already pointed out it's really important to engage learners in reflecting what they already know. That's an important first early step in learning. It does help me to set an appropriate pace or to tailor instruction. If I found out that very few of you guys had ever done a survey before, I might back up a little from what I had planned. And then hopefully you found the polls kind of helpful to learn a little bit about who your peers are. It's really challenging in an online course to get people to know each other and to kind of connect to each other. And it's maybe a little helpful to know that there's, a lot of library directors in our group. So we're going to start talking first about why we actually bother to do evaluation. So at the state library, we do a lot of simple evaluation at our training events. In this class, we'll do some simple evaluation along the way, and I think I want you to think about what kinds of things you need to evaluate at your library. And just want to read Sarah's comment in the chat box. The composition of the class tells you where to focus in terms of what you need to cover and what people would be interested in. That's true. So thinking about, and I just want you to get that piece of paper out now and a pen. Think about something that you would like to evaluate, or think about the last time that you prepared a survey or conducted a poll, and just jot down what the purpose was for you to do that. Why did you do it? Put it on that piece of paper. You don't have to put it in the chat box or share it. You can if you want, but we're gonna come back to that later. I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to do that. The last time you did a questionnaire, what were you hoping to learn? What was your purpose? Or what you're thinking about doing next? What's your purpose? I know for me at the State Library, because I'm primarily involved in training, I'm always evaluating the training, but my purpose isn't in evaluating the training. Well, despite the fact that my funder, LSTA, requires that I evaluate it to some degree, but my real purpose is to try to figure out what training is needed next. And so the purpose in the evaluation is to figure out what to do next. Also, maybe I might discover along the way if a particular presenter is really good and I'd hire him again. So Valerie and Patricia have some comments. Valerie said, I had to step away. Could you repeat what we're supposed to do? Sure, Valerie. I'm sorry. Just get a piece of paper out and write on it that what your purpose was the last time you created a survey, what we were hoping to find out. And Patricia says hers is actually to assist with their upcoming strategic plan. So you're rewriting your strategic plan, Patricia, and you're looking to do some evaluation to help the library, to inform the library's strategic plan. That's a big project. Great. I might use that as an example later on. Because almost everybody at some point or another is doing evaluation for that. Oh, and Jennifer has shared her comment, made some surveys for my teen patrons last year. I wanted to know what they were reading and what programming they liked that year. And Jana says they're working on strategic planning as well. Well, good. We can certainly make that part of our focus too. So you were actually doing some patron assessment and trying to check the pulse of your teens and see what kinds of things they'd like to do, Jennifer. That's a good reason to be evaluating. I think asking yourself why you want to evaluate is an important first step in conducting evaluation, because you really want to start with understanding what you're trying to learn, getting a good, clear understanding. Oh, Abby adds, we're as well doing strategic planning, but we're calling it long-term planning in coordination with a renovation of our building. So yeah, you have a big undertaking that is kind of informing your planning activities. So we're going to call this the research question, because that's what researchers do. They spend a little time at the beginning of their inquiry, their period of inquiry, formulating a research question. So we're going to spend quite a bit about time of that, and this is your homework for next time. If you look at your notes about what it is you want to know, it could be that that's an acceptable research question, a good research question, but it could be it needs a little more work. So because you want your research question to be one issue, right? Just one question, not a bunch of questions, just one question. This is really harder to do than it sounds. And then you check to be sure that your research question is not just a yes or no simple answer. And that sounds easier than it is too. It should be focused. It should be focused on a specific audience. Like Jennifer, she was focused on her teen patrons. Maybe next time she does that inquiry, she wants to focus on the teens that are not coming into the library. So knowing who your audience is really important. Your research question should be focused around a certain time period, not an open-ended for the next 20 years kind of question. It should be focused in terms of what geographic location you're dealing with, or the location could also be just in terms of a thematic location, the topic. And then this makes sense, but you got to avoid murky, vague language. Also easy to say, hard to do. And then you're always end your evaluation or your review of that research question and ask yourself whether it's really addressing anything that anybody really wants to know anything about. Also, we do have a lot of more people involved in strategic planning. Well, that's because we got all these library directors here. So at the bottom of this screen is this link to a one-page handout from Indiana University on how to write a research question. But you have that handout in the materials pane of your class. So just above that chat box, there's a materials pane, and you'll see a little number 1 in parentheses. Again, you'll have to expand the pane, and then you'll see in that materials pane the writing research questions handout. So I want you to go ahead and click on that so you can open it up and save it to your computer, because you're going to need that, because we're going to actually get some practice writing research questions today, and then I'm going to ask you each to write a research question of your very own and then share it with a group. Oh, and Sarah had a nice addition. She says it's also important if anything that anyone can do anything about. Yes, very good point, Sarah. I mean, it's not much use to research something that you can't fix. You might find a problem, but you know it can't be fixed. So just don't ask about it. Exactly. That's very good advice. Thank you for sharing that. Uh, I think uh, that's the, I have those experiences at the state library. One of the reasons I don't ask you when you come to a training after the training to tell me if the room was comfortable, because I can't do anything about that after the training. And besides, I usually already know if the room was comfortable or not. So I don't really need to take up your time to ask you that question. So we're going to critique these questions. So again, you can use your microphone or the chat box. This group seems to be more comfortable with the chat box. So let's see. Oh, hold on a second. I'm just going to respond to something. It's somebody's trying to get into our class. Let me see if I can invite her. Get her here. I'll go offline for just a second and let you use the chat box to critique these questions. Pick the first one. Are social networking sites harmful? What's wrong with that research question? I do apologize. Apparently my mute just randomly turned on. Um, so there's a little bit of chat going on in the chat box about a function that Sarah's, I think it's your ILS, but it basically, if people are they were searching, there's a little, do you need help chat box that comes on a database on the LibGuides. But she says for people who use it all the time, it's quite annoying. But hopefully it's helping people who need more help. So their chat numbers are way up. But it's is that so? That's the research area. You're kind of wondering, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Or I'm not sure where you're going with that, Sarah. Just an opportunity to collect a lot of research and a very broad question. Do you need help? So I was going to ask, and I was going to ask you guys to bring your attention to question number 3. Are libraries addressing the opioid crisis? What do you think are the problems with that research question? Give you a chance. Again, you're welcome to turn on your microphone and speak. Let's see. So it was so we've got, it's a yes, no question again. Yes, it's way too vague. Exactly. Yes. And in what way are they addressing, or for whom are they addressing? Exactly. It's not exactly specific in terms of place or the audience. So it's missing it's got quite a few problems there. Yeah, what are they looking for in an answer? Maybe how are libraries addressing the opioid crisis might make for a reasonable, especially if you put it in context of how are Montana libraries addressing the opioid crisis, or how are libraries, what kinds of partnerships are libraries using, something more specific. So let's try our hand at maybe rewriting a few of these. And let's see, these were my comments about each of these. Yes or no answer. It doesn't indicate any depth for discovery. I mean, what's the whole point of asking that question? So they're addressing the opioid crisis. Why? Who cares? Whereas a research question about how libraries are addressing the opioid crisis might provide interesting feedback that other libraries could use. Right. So let's take that question, the last one. We've already talked about it a little bit, but let's rewrite it together. Are libraries addressing the opioid crisis? Throw out that question and let's look for ones that, a question that's a better statement. So keep in mind the context of why I might be developing research around this topic. Let's say I'm looking for models that I can share with my Montana libraries, my Montana public libraries who might be dealing with this issue. I want some serious analysis in my research. I want it to be focused for my Montana public libraries right now in the next 6 months or a year, things that they can do to address the issue. I want to avoid murky, vague language in my question. And I want to make sure that my research is something that people care about. So how would you rewrite that? Let's use the chat box, or you can also just unmute your microphone and speak up. Any ideas? Okay, Abby jumped right in. Brave Abby, good job. How is your library addressing the opioid crisis? Just a simple change like that. So I could use that as my research question. Might be better if I said, how is your library addressing the opioid crisis? Could be, how are libraries addressing the opioid crisis in ways that could be used by Montana libraries. That helps me get to the actual outcome that I want, which is looking for models to share with other libraries. Another suggestion from Sarah: how are public libraries in Montana successfully reacting to the opioid crisis? Right. So, what are the impacts they're having? Right. That kind of starts to direct us toward defining what those impacts are. Use of opioids are decreased in this community, or Carly has, if your Montana Public Library is addressing the opioid crisis, how have you addressed it over the last few years, and how would you like to rate your efforts? There you go. So very specific, a lot more detailed. 2 questions, kind of, but they were very much related, so we can kind of get away with that. A little bit dangerous territory, though, when you start to create 2 questions. And then Mallory suggests, should our library be addressing the opioid crisis? If so, what organizations should we partner with? So there's, again, 2 questions, a little dangerous. Try to make it 1 question. I mean, really try hard, because you'll find your research question will be more useful to you if it's a single question. So good practice, guys. So we're going to talk about 3 different types of surveys. We've already played around with polls today. There are 2 other types of surveys that you should be thinking about and making decisions about how you want to use them: questionnaires and interviews. So polls and questionnaires. Polls are, like I said, numerical, quantitative, not qualitative, quantitative. And questionnaires can include both types of questions. So ask yourself, with our question about opioid crisis, or if you want to look at your notes and the survey topic the topic that you were trying to address with your last survey, or the one that you're thinking about addressing next, can you answer that research question with a questionnaire? So looking at some of your research questions, here's Sarah's: how are public libraries in Montana successfully reacting to the opioid crisis? Can we answer that research question with a questionnaire? I think we probably could. There are some pros and cons to questionnaires. They're very inexpensive way to collect data. They're pretty quick, quite appropriate for a variety of topics, and the quantitative data is usually easy to compile and compare to other data. Questionnaires can be easily biased. They can be biased by the sample that you get, especially since most of us are not going to be in a position to get a truly unbiased random sample. We're going to be stuck with the people who want to respond. There's a limited ability in questionnaires to get a really broad understanding of a topic, and you always have to worry about survey fatigue. So you want to use a questionnaire when you already have some data for comparative analysis. You don't have to have that, but if you already have data for comparative analysis, it's good to use a questionnaire. It's good to have questionnaires be similar over time. Like I do a pretty similar evaluation tool after most of the trainings that I do. And that's so that I can compare from one to the other, or notice. It's easier to notice an anomaly. When you need information from a large population, it's time to do a questionnaire, a survey. And when you can manage the inherent bias, and we're going to talk a little bit about inherent bias in our data, and when you need information quickly, like the polls that I conducted, that's the time to do it. I need that information at the beginning of class. So you want to skip the survey idea. Just don't do a survey. when there's sufficient data available elsewhere? The answer to your research question is available and already reliably published material. Don't research something that you already can find the answer to. When I say there's sufficient data available elsewhere, we already talked about that little, don't ask the question you already know the answer to. We were discussing a little bit about that today on a project we have going at the state library. We were talking about doing a survey. We're like, but we already know the answer to this question, so we shouldn't bother. The inherent bias will or is likely to skew your data. That's a possibility, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You just can't get a decent sample. If you can't get a decent sample, you shouldn't bother to survey. And this is something we rarely think about, but we need to think about more. The survey or the questionnaire itself could do harm to an individual or a group of people. What harm could you do? Right, that's the good question, Carly. Let's talk about that harm a little bit more in just a second. I'm going to park that question for a second. So there's two types of questions on a questionnaire: closed questions and open-ended questions. The polls that I showed you, those are all closed questions. There's a specific number of responses, and there's not a lot of place for people to explain things. Open-ended questions are places for people to explain things or add more information or give you some text or a little mini comment or something like that. So these are, looking at these questions, would you call them closed questions or open-ended? Do you use the book drop downtown? Is that a closed question or an open-ended one? Oh, well, thank you, Sarah. Sarah was complimenting my photo credits. Well, we're a state agency. We're very concerned. Yeah, closed question. Do you like the program? Is that a closed question? It is closed because it's a yes or no. And how well does this library service improve your life on a scale of 1 to 5? Also, a closed question. It's a limited number of responses. So even though the last one maybe feels a little more like it's open-ended, it's not. An open-ended would be an opportunity for that person to go beyond the question and give you additional information, like a comment box. So before you issue another questionnaire, I would encourage you to do a literature review to basically look and see what top information on that topic already exists. Find existing data, maybe in your library, or check your reports that you can get from your ILS might be able to tell you the answer to your research question. Make sure you have the right sample, that you're addressing the audience you want to. Consider, instead of a questionnaire, interviewing a few key informants. An interview is another way to survey, and you may be able to find out what you need to know by just talking to a few people rather than going through the effort of conducting a questionnaire. And consider polls instead of a questionnaire, something simple. I want to talk a little bit more about those key informants because it's pretty simple to do that. And then we're going to go on and do a Kahoot. Like somebody mentioned that they wanted to talk to their teens about some of the programming, what they were reading, and some of the programming that they might like to see in the upcoming months or years. And that might be a place where you could use key informants instead of a questionnaire, or both. You could go out to the people who come to your library a lot, and you could just say, can I talk to you for a few seconds? I'd like to ask you a few questions. When you start to get the same answers to your questions and you don't get any new information, then you actually know you've interviewed enough people. So sometimes, depending on what your research question is, that might be after just talking to a handful of people, you get the same responses. And so it doesn't have to, conducting interviews doesn't have to be arduous. It can be really simple. So now we're going to do a Kahoot. Kahoots are just an online tool. They're actually designed as for teachers to use for quizzes in classrooms. So I'm going to actually play this Kahoot. You're going to pick up your smartphone or your tablet, and I'm going to check your comprehension using this little Kahoot game. We're going to use the classic game. So the way this starts is that you're going to go to Kahoot it, and then enter this game pin. So just go to kahoot.it on your browser, on your phone. It's going to ask you to put your name in. You can just put initials if you want. And then as soon as we get you guys in there, start to see you, you'll actually pop up on the screen here. Aha, there's one. And we have, I think there's about 3 questions in this little poll. Okay, I'm going to give this another few seconds. I'd like to get to about 12 players before we get started. So pick up your smartphone and go to kahoot.it, and you'll see a little box there to enter in this game pin. This is really fun. You don't want to miss it. Okay, I'm looking for, I think we're going to go ahead and start. Okay, you ready? So on your screen, not on your phone, but on your screen will be the question. Eventually it'll show up on your phone too. And you'll see 4 answers, and you just pick the color icon that goes with the answer that you like. So we're going to get started. What types of questions are found on questionnaires? So on your phone, you click on red, blue, yellow, or green, and you can see we have the answers coming in. You are running out of time. There's only 15 seconds left. All right, we have 11. All right, we're good. And that was 30 seconds. Okay, this is an excellent team. We have 11 people pick the correct answer, which is both open-ended and closed. And now we have next one. This is only 20 seconds. So which of the following is a concern about using a questionnaire to collect data? A little harder question. And that's fine, Carly. I can see it's not looking at correct on your version. All right, we had 10 people respond. Let's see, I forgot which is the correct. Following concern, yes, the respondents may not reveal the truth. I actually forgot to mention this. That is the inherent bias. People oftentimes in a questionnaire, this is documented by science, will give you the question they think you want, not necessarily the way they really feel about something. So those of you who guessed did correctly. All right, one more. We did talk a lot about research questions, so I expect you all get this right. What best describes a research question? Five seconds. Everybody answered, and you all got it correct. Yay! So that's my little quick check for comprehension, and I wanted to introduce you to this tool because I think it's a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to use a little Kahoot. It's free, and it just gives you it gets your audience kind of engaged with you. So I was actually introduced to this tool by one of my cousins who's a teacher, and she uses it in their class all the time, and the kids love it. So it's just a quick little tool for you. And we are running out of time and still have a little bit, something else. A little bit of time, a few things to cover here. So your homework for the next class is to write a research question, not surprisingly. Sorry, let me make this full screen so you can see it. Oh, that's a bummer. Let me get to the right slide again. So write a research question, and then write at least 2 questionnaire questions related to your research question. An open-ended question and a closed question. So one of those comment questions and a closed question. Keep each question, make sure that it doesn't have any ands or buts or alsos in the question, so that's a single question, not what researchers call a double-barreled question. So that's real important. So you want to write a couple of questions in your research question, and then I'm going to have you save that. I've created a Google folder, or you can email it to me and I'll put it in the Google folder for you. I'll get that link for you, which is over here. And I'm sharing the link. I'm going to put this link into the chat box, and if you're watching the recording, it's in the description of this video. Okay, back to our session. So save your work in the Google folder or email it to me. And just so you can get some practice, make sure that this research question is something that is of value to you. For those of you who are working on your strategic plan, that research question could be something like, what are the most challenging problems facing our community? It could be, how is the library? What are the most treasured services that are currently offered by our library? You pick something and give it a try. And then I would also suggest that in the process of writing that research question, you use the handout. And I'll actually put the handout into that Google folder too, so you'll be able to access it there. Use the handout to kind of walk through and test your research question. Maybe with somebody else at your library, kind of sit down with them and say, is this really asking the question that we want? Spend a little bit of time getting that research question down. And now I'm available to answer any other questions you might have about the beginning of your research, which is always that research question, whether or not a questionnaire or a survey will get you the answer you want. So start with the research question, then write a couple questions. And let's see, we have a couple of things coming into the chat. Could you put the link in the chat panel? It was too small for me to read on screen. Yes, it is in the chat panel. There it is. Just add it again. Do you see that okay, Donna? Yes, you're right, Mallory. We didn't get to the harm. Let's talk a little bit about that. And yes, the slides will be available. I will actually throw the slide program into our Google folder for you. I did skip over harm, and that's really important. I'm really glad you mentioned that, Mallory. So when it comes to harm, and let me just back up here. I make sure. And we are going to talk a little bit more about harm when we get to the class portion, when we talk some about the ethics of conducting human subjects research, because whenever you do a survey or a questionnaire, you are asking people and to take their time and to tell you something, what they think or something about them. So you're conducting human subjects research. Most of us, if you were at a university or a research center, you would have an institutional review board, an IRB, where you would run your survey by that group to make sure that it wasn't inherently biased or causing harm to the group that you're either surveying or to groups that you weren't surveying if it has bias. So I think it's just something you have to ask yourself, and we will delve into this more. I think it's in the third session in our class. You might harm people by not including them in your survey. You might harm people by asking the question or conducting the survey in such a way that it's really not possible for a group of people to participate or to get an answer that's correct. For instance, an example I heard one time that I thought was a good one was, you have several book drops for your library around town or around the area you serve, and you want to decide you need to cut back, and you want to stop using a book drop. And it happens to be in a part of town that you ask the people who are coming into the library about which book drops are most convenient for them. But the truth is, the book drop that you end up dropping is the one that's most convenient for the people who don't come into the library. So you asked all the people who come into the library which book drop is most convenient, but the people that you really needed to ask were the ones that don't come into the library very often, but use that book drop offsite somewhere. So that's an example. I think the biggest thing is, when we're dealing with our community, is that our questions can have an inherent bias in them, or that certain questions might make a group of people less likely to participate in your survey, or those are the kinds of questions you have to ask yourself. Oh, well, thank you, Sarah. It was not my original example. I heard it from someone else, and I thought that was a good one. Your sample size can be biased. Your question, right now we're dealing with the 2020 census, and we're in court over one specific question that some people want to have on the census form, and other people feel is going to create an inherent bias. It's about your citizenship, so it's in court trying to decide whether or not that question, do we need to know that question, and is it going to prevent a lot of people from wanting to be part of the count? So that's another good example of how questionnaires themselves can create harm. So, and of course you have to keep in mind too that people do oftentimes create, they answer questionnaires based on what they think, based on the outcome they want to have from that questionnaire. So people can skew your data, and so you can ask a question in such a way that it makes it easy for you to get the outcome you want, instead of actually really inquiring. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording today.